The scent of rain-soaked earth and crushed pine needles should have been comforting, a familiar perfume of home. For Serafina, it was the scent of her failure. It clung to the rough-spun fabric of her tunic, a constant reminder of what she was not. She was an omega of the Ashwood Pack, a title that was less a rank and more a brand seared into her soul. Small, slight, and wolfless, she was an aberration in a society that prized physical power above all else. Her pack valued the strength of a warrior's arm, the breadth of a beta's shoulders, and the fertile promise in a she-wolf's hips. Serafina possessed none of these. Her only notable trait was a peculiar sensitivity to the emotional sense of others, a useless, almost intrusive parlor trick in a world of claws and teeth. She could smell the simmering ambition in an alpha's sweat, the brittle fear behind a courtier's smile, and the deep, aching grief that clung to the widowed like a shroud. To her, it was not a gift. It was a curse that forced her to feel the world's pain without the power to heal any of it. Today, the air was thick with it. The annual pack conclave was in full swing, and the great hall buzzed with forced joviality and thinly veiled contempt. It was the day of pairings, where unmated wolves of age were presented. Her older sister, Cassia, stood near the alpha's dais, a vision in embroidered leather. Cassia was everything Serafina was not. Strong, confident, her inner wolf, a powerful presence that radiated from her like heat from a forge. Every male, from brawny enforcers to calculating betas, watched her with open admiration. Serafina huddled near the kitchens, the smell of roasting boar and spiced wine doing little to mask the stench of her own shame. She had been presented 2 years ago. The silence that had greeted her name was a wound that had never properly closed. No one had stepped forward. No one wanted a wolfless omega, a barren twig on a mighty oak. Hiding again, little mouse? The voice was a venomous caress, dripping with the false sweetness her uncle favored. Lord Vorlag stepped out of the shadows, his own scent a cloying mix of aged parchment and bitter ambition. He was her father's brother, the pack's chief strategist, and the architect of her daily misery. Since her parents' death in a border skirmish, he had been her guardian, a role he performed with the enthusiasm of a wolf tending a sickly lamb he planned to devour later. "Uncle," she murmured, keeping her eyes fixed on the worn flagstones. To meet his gaze was to invite a lecture on her myriad deficiencies. "Your sister does the family proud," he said, his eyes sweeping over Cassia with proprietary satisfaction. "She will make a fine mate for Alpha Marcus's son, a strong alliance. Strength begets strength." He let the unspoken corollary hang in the air between them. "And weakness begets nothing." Serafina's hands clenched at her sides. She could smell the triumphant glee rolling off him, layered over the deep perpetual rot of his jealousy. He had always coveted the alpha position his brother had held. Now, he sought to gain it through Cassia's politically advantageous match. "Look at you," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was far more menacing than a shout. "A ghost at the feast. You have your mother's eyes, but none of her fire. What am I to do with you, Serafina? You offer no strength, no pups, no alliance. You are a drain on our resources, a stain on our name." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, and as always, they found their mark. She flinched, the familiar shame coiling in her gut. She had tried, goddess, she had tried. She had studied herb lore until her fingers were permanently stained green, hoping to be a healer, but without the regenerative spark of an inner wolf, her poultices were merely competent, not magical, not enough. She had a resilience born of constant disappointment, a quiet strength that allowed her to endure. But in her world, endurance wasn't valued. It was merely the state of existence for the unimportant. Her ability to sense the truth of a person's heart was dismissed as fantasy, a girl's overwrought imagination. "I try to be useful, uncle," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Vorlag let out a short, humorless laugh. "Being useful is not about trying, little mouse. It is about being. And you simply are not." He gestured dismissively towards the exit. "Go. Your presence sours the air. I will send for you later. We have things to discuss regarding your future, or lack thereof." She fled without another word, his cruel laughter following her out into the damp courtyard. The cool night air was a balm on her hot cheeks. She leaned against the cold stone wall, drawing in a shaky breath. The world he described, the world that judged her so harshly, was the only one she knew. It was a world of rigid hierarchies, where an omega like her was less than nothing. She was a broken piece of a society obsessed with perfection, and soon, she knew, her uncle would simply discard her. The discussion he mentioned would not be a pleasant one. It would be a pronouncement of her final, useless fate. Sold off as a servant to a backwater pack, or perhaps simply cast out to fend for herself in the wildlands. The thought sent a tremor of pure terror through her. The summons came just after midnight. A grim-faced guard escorted her not to her own small chamber, but to Lord Vorlag's private study. The room was just like the man, suffocating, filled with dark wood, yellowed maps, and the dry, dusty scent of secrets. Vorlag was seated behind a massive oak desk, a single candle flame throwing his hawkish features into sharp, predatory relief. "Sit," he commanded, not looking up from the scroll he was reading. Serafina perched on the edge of a stiff-backed chair, her spine rigid with dread. The air in the room was thick with a new scent from him, something sharp and dangerous she had never smelled before. It was the scent of a gamble, of a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. Finally, he rolled up the scroll and fixed his cold eyes on her. "I have found a use for you, Serafina, a purpose, one that even a wolfless omega can fulfill." Hope, that treacherous, foolish thing, flickered faintly in her chest. A purpose? After years of being told she had none? "What is it?" "You are aware of the Shadow King," he began, his voice low and intense. It was not a question. Everyone was aware of King Alaric. He ruled the vast, mountainous kingdom to the north, a realm of crags and perpetual twilight, known as the Gloomfang Peaks. He was not a wolf shifter like them, but something older, primal, and terrifyingly powerful. Legend said he was a demon bound in flesh, a king of shadows and nightmares. He ruled with an iron fist, and no one from their lands who had ever crossed into his had returned. "He is a monster," Serafina recited the common wisdom. "A tyrant who hoards the riches of the mountains and slaughters any who trespass." "He is also a threat," Vorlag corrected smoothly. "He has begun encroaching on our northern territories, his shadow patrols growing bolder. Alpha Marcus is too cautious, too weak to see the danger. He seeks treaties where he should be sharpening spears. If Alaric is not stopped, he will eventually swallow us whole." A cold knot formed in Serafina's stomach. She knew where this was going. She could smell the scent of death woven into his words. An army would be shattered against his fortress walls, Vorlag continued, steepling his fingers. "A frontal assault is suicide, but a single silent blade in the dark, that is another matter." Serafina stared at him, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "You want to send an assassin. I want to send you," he said, his lips curling into a triumphant smirk. The world tilted. Her. He wanted to send her, a wolfless omega who had never held a sword in her life. It was insane. It was a death sentence. "Me?" she choked out. "Uncle, I can't. I'm no warrior. I have no skills. "Oh, but you do," he countered, leaning forward. The candlelight danced in his eyes, revealing a chilling gleam of fanaticism. "You have the perfect skill. You are invisible. You are an omega. No one will look twice at you. They will see a servant, a waif, a nobody. They won't sense a strong wolf aura because you have none. You can slip through his fortress like a mouse through a crack in the wall, where a proud alpha warrior would be spotted a mile away." He pushed a small, velvet-wrapped object across the desk. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Inside was a dagger, its blade the color of a moonless night, its hilt carved from bone. It felt cold and hungry in her palm. "This blade is coated with silverbane," Vorlag explained. "A rare poison, lethal to all supernatural creatures, no matter how powerful. A single scratch is all it will take. Get close to him. In his throne room, his dining hall, his bedchamber, it matters not. Create a diversion, act the clumsy servant, and deliver the wound. Then you simply slip away in the chaos." It was a suicide mission. He wasn't giving her a purpose. He was giving her a tidy, distant way to die. He would be rid of his shameful niece and potentially rid of a political rival in one fell swoop. If she succeeded, he could use the ensuing chaos to seize power. If she failed and was killed, no one would miss her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it is necessary for the survival of this pack," he snapped, his composure cracking for a moment. The acrid scent of his ambition burned her nostrils. "And because it is the only way you will ever repay the debt you owe for the air you breathe. You will do this, Serafina. Or I will personally escort you to the edge of our territory and leave you for the feral beasts that roam the deadwood. At least this way, your death might mean something." The choice was no choice at all. A swift death by a king's guard or a slow, agonizing one in the wilderness. He had her trapped. He was using her desperation as his weapon. "When?" she asked, her voice hollow. "At dawn," he said, settling back in his chair, the mask of the calm strategist back in place. "A merchant caravan heading north has been persuaded to take on a new kitchen maid. You will be that maid. From there, you are on your own." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. She stumbled from the room, the poisoned dagger feeling like a block of ice against her skin. He had not offered her a purpose. He had simply handed her an executioner's blade and pointed it at her own heart by way of another's. As she walked through the silent corridors of the home that had never felt like one, a strange, cold resolve began to settle over her terror. Vorlag thought her weak, a pawn to be sacrificed. He thought her life was worthless. Maybe it was, but if she was going to die, she would die on her own terms, in the fortress of a monster, not as a forgotten scrap thrown to the wolves. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a tiny, defiant spark in the vast darkness of her despair. The journey north was a blur of rumbling wagon wheels, coarse food, and the oppressive damp chill that seemed to seep from the very bones of the land. The Gloomfang peaks lived up to their name, tearing at the sky like jagged black teeth. A perpetual mist clung to their slopes, and the sun was a pale, forgotten memory. Serafina, huddled in the back of a supply wagon, felt the weight of the place settle on her. It smelled of ancient stone, cold iron, and a deep, resonant power that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Getting into the Shadow King's fortress, the Onyx Citadel, was surprisingly easy, just as Vorlag had predicted. Her omega scent, or lack thereof, rendered her utterly unremarkable. The guards at the gate, massive shifters whose wolves rumbled in their chests, gave her and the merchant a cursory glance, their attention fixed on the caravan's cargo. She was just another scullery maid, her head bowed, her presence as significant as a field mouse. The citadel was a labyrinth of black basalt and cold, echoing halls. It was surprisingly clean, austere, and efficient. There was no sign of the debauchery and cruelty the stories described. The servants moved with a quiet, disciplined purpose, their faces grim but not fearful. The air itself felt different here. It was heavy, yes, but not with malice. It was heavy with a profound, unshakable sorrow. Serafina was assigned to the lower kitchens, a cavernous, steam-filled room where she spent 2 days peeling vegetables and scrubbing pots. Her mind racing, the dagger was strapped to her inner thigh, a cold, constant reminder of her mission. She listened to the kitchen chatter, gleaning what little she could about the reclusive king. They spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. They called him the Shadow King, not just for his sigil, but because he was rarely seen, preferring the solitude of the highest tower. On the 3rd night, her chance came. A special dinner was being prepared for the king, a solitary affair as always, to be delivered to his private chambers. The servant girl tasked with the duty fell suddenly ill, her face pale and beaded with sweat. Before anyone else could volunteer, Serafina stepped forward. "I can take it," she said, her voice quiet but steady. The head cook, a harried woman with a permanent frown, barely looked at her. "Fine, just don't drop it, and do not speak to him unless spoken to. Do not even look at him if you can help it." Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she carried the heavy silver tray up the winding stairs of the royal spire. The higher she climbed, the more the oppressive sorrow in the air intensified. It was a tangible thing, a scent of ancient grief, loneliness, and a pain so deep it felt like a physical wound. This was his scent, the scent of the monster she was sent to kill. The guards outside his chambers, clad in obsidian armor, were silent sentinels. They stepped aside without a word, opening the massive iron-banded doors for her. She slipped inside, her eyes downcast as she had been instructed. The room was vast and Spartan. A huge hearth crackled with a low fire, casting long dancing shadows across the stone walls. Books were stacked everywhere, on tables, chairs, and the floor. A massive unadorned bed sat against the far wall. The only source of opulence was a wide balcony that overlooked the mist-shrouded peaks, and there he was. King Alaric stood on the balcony, his back to her. He was larger than she had imagined, a towering silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. He wore simple black breeches and a loose-fitting tunic, his form lean and corded with muscle. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, long and unbound, stirring in the cold mountain wind. He was not the hulking, deformed beast of the legends. He was just a man. She quietly set the tray on a table, her hand creeping toward the dagger hidden beneath her skirt. Now was the time. He was distracted. She could rush him, plunge the blade into his back, and be gone before he even knew what was happening. Her muscles tensed. This was it, for the pack, for her own survival. Then he turned. Serafina froze, her breath catching in her throat. His face was all sharp angles and severe beauty, like something carved from the mountain itself. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten silver, and they swirled with an ancient power and an even more ancient pain. And clinging to him, writhing around his shoulders and arms like living things, were tendrils of pure shadow. They coiled and uncoiled, whispering with a soundless malevolence. This was his curse. This was the source of the sorrow that saturated the very air of the castle. She could feel it now, an agony that resonated with her own peculiar senses. It wasn't the scent of a tyrant's rage, but of a prisoner's despair. He took a step toward her, his silver eyes narrowing. He hadn't seen the tray. He hadn't seen the servant. He was looking right at her. "Who are you?" His voice was a low growl, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. It vibrated through the floor, through the soles of her worn boots, and up into her very soul. What is that scent? What? Panic seized her. He knew. He sensed something was wrong. Her hand tightened on the hilt of the dagger. It was now or never. She lunged, not with the grace of an assassin, but with the desperate, clumsy haste of a cornered animal. He moved with impossible speed. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next, his hand was clamped around her wrist, his grip like iron. The dagger clattered to the floor. Useless. The shadows around him surged, darkening, hissing. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the killing blow. But it didn't come. His grip on her wrist was unyielding, but not crushing. He was simply holding her, his head cocked as if listening to a sound only he could hear. The shadows around him, which had swelled with aggression, suddenly stilled. A few tendrils drifted forward, tentatively, as if to taste the air around her. "You," he breathed, his voice rough with disbelief. The anger in his silver eyes was being replaced by a dawning, stunned confusion. He lowered his head, his dark hair falling around his face, and inhaled deeply, his nose just inches from her throat. Serafina trembled, paralyzed by fear and a strange, unwelcome flutter of something else entirely. She smelled his shock, his confusion, but underneath it, the crushing weight of his loneliness lessened just for a moment. Soothed by her proximity, he looked up, his silver eyes locking with hers. The shadows around him receded slightly, as if placated. The raw power emanating from him was terrifying, but the look on his face was one of complete, world-shattering astonishment. He released her wrist and took a half-step back, his expression a mask of conflict and awe. He looked from her to the fallen dagger, and back to her again. He should have been furious. He should have killed her on the spot. Instead, he uttered a single word, a word that shattered her world far more completely than any executioner's blade. A word spoken not in anger or triumph, but in a tone of ragged, impossible discovery. Mate. The word hung in the air between them, electric and unbelievable. Mate. A king of shadows and a wolfless Omega. It was a cosmic joke, a cruel twist of fate that made no sense. Serafina could only stare, her mind a maelstrom of terror and confusion. Vorlag had sent her to kill a monster, but the creature before her had just named her the other half of his soul. Alaric looked just as stunned as she felt. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his silver eyes wide with a turmoil that seemed to shake his entire being. The shadows that clung to him writhed in agitation, mirroring his inner conflict. "That's impossible," he rasped, more to himself than to her. He took another deep breath, his gaze fixed on her. "And yet, your scent, it quiets the torment. Nothing has ever quieted it." Serafina's senses were overwhelmed. His raw, agonizing loneliness was still there, but now it was shot through with a thread of incredulous hope. It was a fragile, terrifying thing. She backed away, her heel bumping against the fallen dagger. A reminder. She was an assassin. He was her target. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. His gaze dropped to the silverbane-coated blade on the floor. His eyes hardened, the brief flicker of hope extinguished and replaced by a cold, familiar weariness. The shadows around him darkened once more. "I see," he said, his voice flat. "They sent you to kill me, and they sent a weapon they thought I wouldn't see coming. Clever." He bent and picked up the dagger, holding it gingerly by the hilt. He studied the dark, oily sheen on the blade, his expression unreadable. Serafina braced herself, expecting him to turn it on her. Instead, He walked to the hearth and, with a flick of his wrist, tossed it into the flames. The metal hissed, and the poison burned away with a puff of greasy, green smoke. "You failed your mission," he stated, turning back to her. He was no longer the shocked potential mate. He was the king again, powerful and intimidating. "Tell me who sent you." Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but defiance was a fire in her veins. If she was to die here, she would not die as Vorlag's puppet. She would not betray her pack, as wretched as they were, to this stranger. "No," she said, lifting her chin. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He clearly wasn't used to being defied. "You would protect those who sent you to your death?" "I would not give you the satisfaction of being your informant," she retorted, her voice shaking only slightly. For a long moment, he just watched her, his silver eyes boring into her. She could feel him weighing his options. He could kill her. He could torture her for the information. It was what any of the alphas she knew would have done. "Guards!" he called out, his voice booming through the chamber. The two obsidian-clad sentinels entered immediately, their hands on the hilts of their swords. Seraphina's heart sank. This was it. "Take her to the guest chamber in this wing," Alaric commanded. "See that she is given food and water. She is not to be harmed, but she is not to leave." The guards exchanged a bewildered look but bowed their heads. "Yes, my king." Seraphina was just as bewildered. A guest chamber? Not the dungeons? One of the guards took her arm gently, and she allowed herself to be led from the room, casting one last confused glance at the Shadow King. He was standing by the fire, staring into the flames, the living shadows coiling around him like restless serpents. The guest chamber was more luxurious than any room she had ever seen. A soft bed with fur blankets, a small fireplace already lit, and a window overlooking a sheer drop down the mountainside. It was a beautiful prison. She was trapped. For days, she remained there, a prisoner of the king's bizarre mercy. 3 times a day, a silent servant would bring her a tray of food, far better than anything she had ever eaten. But she saw no one else. She was left utterly alone with her thoughts. She replayed their encounter over and over. Mate. The word was a brand on her mind. The fates had a cruel sense of humor. And his curse, the shadows. She had felt their malevolence, but she had also felt his fight against them. He was not one with them. He was their jailer, and their prison was his own body. On the 4th night, the door opened. It was Alaric. He carried no weapons and had dismissed his guards. He simply stood in the doorway, the shadows around him seeming more subdued than before. "You have not tried to escape," he observed. "The fall from that window looks unpleasant," she replied, gesturing with her head. A hint of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting, startlingly handsome expression. "You have spirit," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "Most would be screaming or begging by now." "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice tight. "I want to understand," he said, his voice low and serious. He kept a respectful distance, leaning against the far wall. "The moment you entered my chambers, the whispers went silent for the first time in a century. The shadows, they calmed. Your presence is like a balm to this curse." He paused, his silver eyes searching her face. "And you are an Omega, but you do not carry the scent of submission. You smell of rain-drenched earth, of hidden strength, and of a loneliness that rivals my own." Her breath hitched. No one had ever seen her that way. They saw a wolfless failure. He saw her unique scent sense, which she had always considered a useless affliction, suddenly felt like a bridge between them. She could feel the truth in his words. She could sense the deep, aching chasm of his isolation, and it was a mirror of her own. "My pack," They see me as a burden, she admitted, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. Weak, useless. They are fools, Alaric stated with absolute certainty. They value the braying of wolves but cannot recognize the strength of the mountain that stands in silence. He spoke of strength in a way she had never heard before, not as something of tooth and claw, but as something of endurance and spirit. A tentative, fragile connection began to form between them in the quiet of the room. He was the feared king, she the failed assassin, yet they were both prisoners, he of his curse, she of her birth. And somehow, in this strange confinement, they had found the one other person in the world who might just understand. The days that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm. Alaric began visiting her every evening. He would bring books from his library, or a map of the stars as seen from the highest peaks, or simply sit in the chair by her fire while he worked on royal decrees. The forced proximity was no longer a threat, but a tentative exploration. He never touched her, never pushed for more information about who sent her. Instead, he asked about her. He asked about the Ashwood pack, about the taste of wild berries in the summer, about the songs her mother used to sing. At first, her answers were clipped and cautious, but his genuine curiosity slowly chipped away at her defenses. She found herself telling him about her useless ability, how she could smell the lie on a traitor's breath, or the secret grief of a warrior who had lost a friend. Instead of dismissing it, he listened intently. "It is not useless," he said one night, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight. "You see the truth beneath the surface. That is a power greater than any brute strength. It is a power I have not seen in centuries." In turn, he spoke of his kingdom. He told her of the intricate politics of the deep-dwelling mountain clans, of the hardy people who carved a life from the stone, of his efforts to protect them from the very curse that afflicted him. He never spoke of it directly, but she could feel it, a constant thrum of pain beneath his calm exterior. The shadows were always with him, a writhing cloak of darkness, but she noticed they were calmer in her presence, less menacing. One evening, he found her staring out the window, a melancholic expression on her face. "You miss the open sky," he stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, not looking at him. "I miss the feel of wind that doesn't cut like a knife. I miss the smell of a forest that isn't perpetually damp." The next night, he did not come to her room. Instead, a guard appeared at her door with a heavy, fur-lined cloak. "The king requests your presence in the upper observatory," the guard said, his voice laced with confusion. She was led to the very top of the highest spire, to a circular room with a ceiling made entirely of enchanted glass. Through it, the sky was a breathtaking tapestry of stars, so clear and bright they felt close enough to touch. The biting wind was kept at bay by the magic of the dome. Alaric was waiting for her, standing in the center of the room. "I cannot give you your forest," he said, his voice soft, "but I can give you the sky." Serafina was speechless. The gesture was so unexpected, so deeply thoughtful. It stole the air from her lungs. She walked to the center of the room, tilting her head back to gaze at the river of stars flowing across the glass. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I come here when the shadows grow too loud," he confessed, his voice dropping lower. "They do not like the light, even the light of distant suns." It was the closest he had ever come to talking about his curse. She turned to look at him. In the silvery starlight, the shadows clinging to him seemed less a part of him and more a separate, parasitic entity. She could feel their cold hunger, and she could feel the sheer force of will he exerted every second of every day to keep them contained. "What are they?" she asked softly, her fear for him overriding her fear of him. His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he would shut her out, that she had pushed too far. But then he sighed, a sound of immense weariness. An old enemy, a being of pure spite and shadow that my ancestor bound to our bloodline centuries ago, trapping it to save this kingdom. My family has served as its cage ever since. Each generation, the cage grows weaker. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a pain that lanced through her. I am the last of my line. The cage is breaking. The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. He had just handed her the truth of his greatest weakness, a secret that could destroy him. He was not a monster. He was a warden, a self-sacrificing king holding back a tide of darkness at the cost of his own soul. But with you, he said, taking a hesitant step closer. When you are near, the cage holds. The whispers of the shadow fade. I can think. I can feel something other than its cold rage. The pull between them, the strange, undeniable call of the mate bond, intensified. It was no longer just a shocking pronouncement, but a palpable connection forged in shared loneliness and burgeoning trust. Her scent soothed his curse. His honesty healed her shame. But their fragile peace was not destined to last. A new scent began to permeate the castle, carried on the cloaks of newly arrived guards and advisors. It was the scent of her old pack, of ashwood and pine, and beneath it, the bitter, ambitious odor of her uncle, Lord Vorlag. He was looking for her. He knew his plan had failed, and he would not take that failure lying down. A spy within the castle brought word. A delegation from the Ashwood pack had arrived at the citadel's gates, demanding an audience with the king and the return of their stolen pack member. Alaric's face was grim as he listened to the report. He is testing my borders and using you as the excuse, he growled. The shadows around him seethed with a cold fury. He will not have you. The external threat had arrived, and Serafina knew her uncle. He would not be satisfied with a simple refusal. He was a strategist. This was merely his opening move in a much deadlier game. He had come to finish the job she had failed to do, and he would tear down the entire kingdom to do it. The tension in the Onyx Citadel became a palpable thing. Alaric refused Vorlag's delegation, sending back a curt and chilling message that any uninvited member of the Ashwood pack found within his borders would be treated as an invader. It was a declaration of cold war, and everyone knew it. Alaric became more withdrawn, the weight of his duties and the new threat pressing down on him. He still visited Serafina, but their quiet evenings were now laced with a frantic edge. The shadows around him were more agitated than ever, agitated by his stress and the proximity of his new enemy. He is planning something, Alaric said one night, pacing her chamber like a caged beast. Vorlag is not the type to make an open challenge unless he believes he has an advantage. He is goading me. Serafina could feel the truth of it. Her uncle was a creature of aims and hidden daggers. He would never choose a fair fight. She could smell his insidious influence even from afar, a poison seeping into the mountain air. The nights grew longer and colder. A storm settled over the peaks, an unnatural tempest of shrieking wind and black roiling clouds. The pressure in the atmosphere was immense, making Serafina's head ache. It felt as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. The storm feeds it, Alaric rasped. When he came to her chamber late one evening, he looked haggard, his face pale and drawn. The shadows around him were almost solid, obscuring his form in a churning vortex of darkness. The curse, it grows stronger in the heart of the storm. The whispers are screaming, he stumbled, catching himself against the wall. A wave of agony washed off him, so potent that Serafina cried out, clutching her head. It was a pain beyond physical description, the feeling of a soul being torn apart. You should not be here, he grunted, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "Leave. Go to the lower levels. It is not safe." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She moved toward him, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her heart refusing to obey. "Flee, you fool!" he roared, and his voice was no longer his own. It was a discordant chorus of whispers and growls, the voice of the shadow entity wearing his throat. He collapsed to his knees, his body convulsing. The transformation was horrific. It was not the clean, swift change of a werewolf. It was a violent, agonizing tearing of reality. His form elongated, his limbs twisting at unnatural angles. The shadows that clung to him poured into him, swelling his muscles, sharpening his features into a terrifying parody of a wolf, but with too many eyes and teeth made of solidified night. He was becoming a beast of pure shadow and rage, a creature from a nightmare. Serafina was frozen with terror, but beneath the fear was a profound, aching pity. This was his secret. This was the monster he fought to contain every single day. She wasn't looking at a monster. She was looking at a good man losing the battle for his own soul. The beast rose to its full, towering height, its multifaceted eyes glowing with malevolent silver light. It let out a shriek that was the sound of tearing fabric and breaking bones, a sound that shook the very stones of the tower. It turned its terrible head and fixed its gaze on her. It saw her not as a threat, but as an anchor, the last remnant of the man it was consuming. It took a step toward her, a low, possessive growl rumbling in its chest. Her mind screamed at her to run, to save herself, but she thought of his kindness, of the starlit sky he had shown her, of the way he had called her strong when everyone else had called her weak. She could not abandon him to this. "Alaric," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Alaric, I am here." She held out her hand. It was the most foolish, most courageous thing she had ever done. The shadow beast paused, its head tilting. A flicker of confusion crossed its monstrous face. It could smell her. It could smell the strange, soothing scent that quieted the eternal storm inside it. It took another step, then another, until it loomed over her. It lowered its massive head, the air chilling as it drew near. It let out a soft, questioning rumble and nudged her outstretched hand with its snout, which felt like touching cold, shifting smoke. Summoning every ounce of her courage, Serafina reached out with her other hand and placed it on the side of its face. The creature flinched, but did not pull away. She focused, pushing past her terror, and tapped into her unique ability. She didn't just smell his emotions, she projected her own. She poured all her feelings of safety, of trust, of acceptance down the fragile bridge of their bond. She sent him the image of the observatory, the scent of the rain-soaked earth he had said she carried, the feeling of his relief when the whispers went silent. A shudder went through the beast's massive frame. A flicker of recognition of Alaric's recognition flashed in those terrible eyes. The monstrous form seemed to waver, the shadows losing their cohesion for a moment. Then, from the depths of that monstrous throat, a single word emerged. It was a tortured, guttural sound, a roar and a plea and a revelation all in one. It was the last, desperate cry of the man being consumed by the darkness. "Mate," the word echoed through the chamber, filled with a desperate possessive agony. It was a claim made from the brink of oblivion, and in that moment, Serafina knew she would rather die by his hand than leave him to face this alone. The wolfless Omega stood before the shadow beast, her hand on its cheek, and did not run. She had found her purpose, not as an assassin, but as an anchor in the storm. The storm outside raged in symphony with the battle inside the king's chamber. The shadow beast, momentarily pacified by her touch, and the recognition of their bond, was still a creature of immense, volatile power. A low growl still rumbled in its chest. A constant war between the entity's rage and Alaric's desperate hold on control. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed from the lower levels of the citadel, shaking the tower to its foundations. It was not the sound of the storm. It was the sound of a gate being breached. The beast's head snapped up, its silver eyes glowing with renewed fury. It could sense the invaders, the violation of its sanctum. The fragile peace was shattered. Shouts and the clang of steel on steel drifted up the stairwell. Seraphina's blood ran cold. She recognized the war cries. It was the Ashwood Pack. It was Vorlag. He had used the cover of the storm, perhaps even augmented it with some dark ritual, to launch his attack. He had known this would be Alaric's moment of greatest weakness. The chamber door burst, open, not with the force of an attack, but swinging wide to admit a triumphant Lord Vorlag. He was flanked by two of his most brutal enforcers, their faces grim masks of determination. Vorlag's eyes, however, were wide with manic glee as he took in the scene. "Behold!" he cried, his voice ringing with theatrical triumph. He wasn't speaking to them, but to the crowd of Alaric's own courtiers and guards who had followed him up the stairs, their faces a mixture of horror and confusion. "The great and terrible Shadow King. I told you he was a monster, a blight upon this land. He is not your protector. He is a beast that should be put down." Vorlag had not come just to kill a king. He had come to obliterate a legacy, to expose Alaric's secret, and turn his own people against him. The scent of his smug, venomous ambition was so strong it was nauseating. Alaric's people stared, frozen in shock at the sight of their king's cursed form. Fear and doubt began to ripple through them, their loyalty wavering in the face of such a terrifying revelation. This was Vorlag's true weapon. The shadow beast let out a roar of pure fury, not at its own people, but at the man who had orchestrated this. It took a threatening step forward, its claws scraping grooves into the stone floor. "Kill it!" Vorlag shrieked at his enforcers. "While it's distracted!" The two shifters lunged, not at the beast, but at Seraphina. It was a cruel, calculated tactic. They knew she was its focus, its weakness. If they could take her, the beast would be rudderless in its rage. Everything happened in a blur. Seraphina had no time to scream, no time to run, but the beast moved with a speed that defied its size. It didn't meet their attack with a frontal assault. Instead, it threw itself in front of her, shielding her small frame with its massive, shadowy body. An enforcer's silvered axe, meant for her, glanced off the beast's flank. It let out a howl of pain as the silver burned its ethereal flesh, but it did not move. It stood over her, a living wall of darkness and sacrifice. The act was so utterly protective, so selfless, that it stunned everyone into silence. Vorlag's men, Alaric's court, even Seraphina herself. This was not the mindless rampage of a monster. This was the desperate, defiant act of a king protecting his queen. In that moment of stunned silence, Alaric's people saw the truth. They saw their king, in his most horrific form, risking agony to shield the small, unarmed woman behind him. They saw not a monster to be feared, but a leader to be defended. "For the king!" One of the obsidian guards roared, his voice breaking the spell. He charged, not at his monstrous king, but at Vorlag's enforcers. The rest of the citadel guard followed suit, their loyalty ignited by their king's sacrifice. The chamber erupted into a vicious melee. Vorlag, seeing his plan to turn the court failing, snarled in frustration. His eyes fell on Seraphina, huddled under the protective shadow of the beast. "You," he spat. "This is all your fault, you useless little whelp. If I can't have the throne, I will at least have the satisfaction of finishing what you started." He drew a dagger, a twin to the one he had given her, its blade coated in the same green-black poison, and darted through the fighting, his eyes locked on her. The beast that was Alaric roared, trying to turn, but it was slow, wounded by the silver axe. It could not move in time. Vorlag was going to reach her. Serafina looked at the man she loved, the king who had become a monster to save her. She saw the desperation in his burning eyes. He had shielded her with his body. Now, she had to shield him with her spirit. There was no time for thought, only for instinct. As Vorlag lunged, a desperate, primal power surged through Serafina. It was not the strength of a wolf, but something uniquely her own, her so-called useless ability, the power to sense and influence the emotional scent of the world, flared into a brilliant, defiant inferno. She stood her ground, meeting Vorlag's murderous gaze. She did not scream or cower. Instead, she opened herself completely to the curse that afflicted Alaric, to the shadow entity that was consuming him. She had been a balm to it, a soothing presence. Now, she would become a blade. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her very essence. She pushed her own scent, the scent of rain-washed earth, and quiet resilience deep into the churning chaos of Alaric's soul. It was no longer a gentle comfort. It was an anchor, a lighthouse in the raging storm of his curse. "Alaric!" she screamed, not with her voice, but with her mind, pouring all her love, her trust, and her ferocious belief in him down the mate bond. "Hold on! Fight!" Simultaneously, she turned the focus of her power outward. She drew in the tangible, suffocating ambition of her uncle, the scent of his greed and his cruelty. And for the first time in her life, she didn't just endure it, she weaponized it. She projected that vile essence directly at the shadow entity. It was like offering poison to a starving man. The entity, a being of pure negative emotion, was drawn to the potent, delicious hatred emanating from Vorlag. It hesitated, its focus shifting for a barest fraction of a second from consuming Alaric to tasting this new, potent source of darkness. That fraction of a second was all Alaric needed. Feeling the momentary reprieve, feeling Serafina's strength flooding his soul, the man within the beast fought back. A human groan of effort tore through the monstrous howl. The shadowy form flickered violently. Alaric was reasserting control, using the wedge she had created to drive the entity back. Vorlag, momentarily confused by the shift in the creature's attention, faltered in his stride. He was just feet from her, his poisoned dagger raised. Serafina knew she had one last thing to do. An entity was tethered to Alaric's bloodline, an ancient, magical chain. She couldn't break it, but maybe she could offer it a new anchor. "Take me instead," she projected, a silent, selfless plea aimed at the heart of the shadow. "His soul is strong, mine is quiet. Take me." It was a desperate, foolish gamble, offering her own soul as a sacrifice. The shadow entity recoiled, as if struck. It was a creature of spite and domination. It fed on pain and despair. The scent of her selfless offer, of pure, unadulterated love and sacrifice, was anathema to it. It was like dousing a fire with pure water. It could not consume it. It could not understand it. And the purity of the emotion burned it more than any silver blade ever could. The entity shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and pulled away from Alaric's soul, recoiling from the searing light of Serafina's sacrifice. The ancient bond, the chain that had held his family for generations, stretched taut, and then, under the pressure of a power it was never designed to withstand, it shattered. The shadows exploded outward from Alaric's body in a silent, violent wave, throwing everyone in the room off their feet. The monstrous form collapsed, shrinking, the darkness evaporating like mist in the morning sun. In its place, Alaric lay on the floor, gasping, his human form restored, pale and shaking but blessedly whole. The air in the room was suddenly clean, the centuries-old pressure of the curse utterly gone. He was free. Serafina fell to her knees, the effort of what she had done draining every ounce of her strength. Vorlag stared, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. His prize, his leverage, his monster, was gone. All that was left was the man he had tried to destroy, and the wolfless Omega who had somehow, impossibly, saved him. With a final, desperate snarl, he turned his rage on the true source of his failure. He raised his dagger to strike the exhausted Serafina. He never reached her. A black-gloved hand shot out and caught his wrist in a grip of iron. Alaric was on his feet, his eyes no longer the shifting silver of his curse, but a clear, steady gray. They burned with a cold, absolute fury. "You," Alaric said, his voice quiet, but carrying more power than any monstrous roar. "Threatened my mate." With a single brutal twist, he disarmed Vorlag, the poisoned dagger skittering across the floor. He hauled the sputtering lord to his feet. The fighting in the room had stopped. Alaric's guards had subdued Vorlag's men. All eyes were on the king and his vanquished foe. "For your treason against this crown and your crimes against the one I hold above it," Alaric pronounced, his voice ringing with royal authority. "You are sentenced to the black cells until your ambition rots along with your bones." He shoved Vorlag into the waiting arms of his guards, who dragged the screaming, defeated lord away. The nightmare was over. Alaric turned, his eyes finding Serafina. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt before her, his expression a mixture of awe, relief, and a love so profound it made her breath catch. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my soul. You saved me first," she whispered back, tears of exhaustion and joy blurring her vision. In front of his entire court, the Shadow King, now just a man, leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reverence, a kiss of promises kept, and a new world dawning. The wolfless Omega had not only saved the king, she had become the heart of his kingdom. With the curse broken and Vorlag imprisoned, a profound peace settled over the onyx citadel. The oppressive sorrow that had clung to the stones for centuries dissipated, replaced by a tentative, unfamiliar hope. The sky itself seemed brighter, the mists over the Gloomfang peaks less menacing. It was as if the entire kingdom had been holding its breath alongside its king, and could finally exhale. Alaric, free from the whispers and the constant draining battle against the shadow, was a changed man. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a vibrant energy. He moved with a new confidence, and the rare smiles that had once startled Serafina now came freely and often, especially when he looked at her. His court, having witnessed her impossible feat and his selfless devotion, embraced her without question. They had seen her quiet resilience and her fierce heart. They no longer saw a wolfless Omega from a rival pack. They saw the savioress of their king, the woman whose unique strength had succeeded where generations of warriors and mages had failed. They called her the Heartstone, the anchor who had brought their king back from the brink. The title fit far better than Omega ever had. A week after Vorlag's defeat, Alaric led Serafina to the great throne room. The hall was filled with his highest-ranking lords, clan leaders, and advisors. She walked beside him, not behind him, her hand held firmly in his. He led her to the dais, where 2 thrones sat. One was the imposing, obsidian throne of the Shadow King. The other, A smaller but equally elegant chair carved from pale moon-white stone had been empty for a century. Alaric stopped before his people, his clear gray eyes sweeping over them. "You have known me as your Shadow King," he began, his voice ringing with authority. "You have known my family's burden, and now you know its end. It was not ended by a sword or by a spell, but by a spirit stronger than any shadow, by a heart braver than any army." His gaze fell upon Seraphina, and his voice softened, filled with a love that resonated through the entire hall. "This is Seraphina of the Ashwood Pack. The fates named her my mate, my soul recognized her as my anchor, and my heart names her my queen." He turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. "Seraphina, will you stand beside me? Will you rule this kingdom with me, not as a consort, but as my equal?" Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. She thought of her past, of the girl cowering in the kitchens, branded as useless, and she looked at her future, standing beside a king who cherished her for exactly who she was. There was only one possible answer. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Always." A roar of approval erupted from the assembled court. Alaric smiled, a brilliant, joyous expression, and then did something that solidified their bond in the eyes of all shifters. He leaned forward and gently, reverently, bit the juncture of her neck and shoulder. It was not a painful bite, but a firm, possessive pressure that sent a jolt of pure energy, of connection and belonging through her entire body. The mating mark, a permanent, visible declaration that she was his and he was hers. When he pulled back, a faint, silvery tracery, like a constellation, marked her skin. She was no longer Seraphina the Omega. She was Seraphina, queen of the Gloomfang Peaks, mate to the last of the Shadow Kings. Their union transformed the kingdom. Seraphina's gentle influence tempered Alaric's stern rule. Her ability to sense the truth of people's hearts made her an unparalleled diplomat and judge. She championed the weak, valued skills beyond the purely martial, and taught a society built on harsh survival the meaning of compassion. Strength, she taught them, was not just about the sharpness of one's claws, but the resilience of one's spirit. Epilogue. 1 year later, Seraphina stood on the balcony of their private chambers, the same balcony where she had first seen the tortured king. The mountain air was crisp and clean, and the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the peaks. The mists were gone for good. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into the familiar warmth of Alaric's chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his hand coming to rest protectively over her gently swelling belly. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into her hair. "About the girl who came here to kill a monster," she confessed, a small smile playing on her lips. She was so frightened and so very lost. "And that monster is eternally grateful that she failed so spectacularly." He chuckled, his voice a low, happy rumble. He pressed a soft kiss to her mating mark, the silvery lines a familiar comfort against his lips. "She was never lost, my love. She was just waiting for the path to find her." News had come months ago from the Ashwood Pack. After Vorlag's treason was revealed, Alpha Marcus had been forced to re-examine his own counsel. Seraphina's sister Cassia had stepped up, her own inner strength finally shining through, and was now a respected advisor, helping to forge a new, lasting peace between their two peoples. They were no longer enemies, but allies, their kingdoms thriving. Below them in the courtyard, the children of the citadel played. The laughter of wolf-shifters, mountain folk, and even a few stoic deep-dwellers mingled in the air. It was a sound of unity, a sound of the new world they were building together. The healers say it will be a son, Alaric said softly, his hand stroking her stomach. A prince with his mother's heart and, hopefully, his father's tolerance for paperwork. Serafina laughed, turning in his arms to face him. He will have the best of both of us, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. The wolfless Omega, once rejected and despised, had found her home. The cursed king, once isolated and feared, had found his heart. Together, they had not only saved each other, but had healed a kingdom, proving that the greatest strength is not the power to destroy, but the courage to love, and the magic found in being truly, completely seen.